April 2025 will be remembered as a pivotal month in global trade. It marked the beginning of a significant shift in the way nations interacted economically, setting the stage for a new era of trade policies and economic strategies. The United States, under the leadership of President Trump, unleashed a wave of tariffs. These tariffs were part of a broader strategy aimed at rebalancing trade relationships that had long been perceived as unfair. These tariffs targeted a wide range of goods from across the globe, affecting everything from electronics to agricultural products. The world watched with a mixture of apprehension and disbelief. Many wondered how these changes would impact the global economy and their own livelihoods. This was not just a policy shift. It was a seismic event that threatened to reshape the landscape of international commerce, with potential ripple effects across various sectors. It was a seismic event that threatened to reshape the landscape of international commerce. The implications were vast, touching every corner of the globe. President Trump, true to his America First mantra, argued that these tariffs were long overdue. He believed that they were essential to restoring the nation's economic strength. He claimed that decades of unfair trade practices had hollowed out American manufacturing. Factories had closed and jobs had been lost to overseas competition. Foreign countries, he asserted, had taken advantage of the United States for too long. It was time to level the playing field and bring back economic prosperity. The tariffs, he promised, would bring back jobs and restore America's economic dominance. The impact was immediate, with industries beginning to feel the effects. From automobiles to aluminum, the cost of imported goods began to rise. This increase in prices was felt across various sectors, affecting both businesses and consumers. Businesses and consumers alike felt the pinch. The higher costs of goods led to increased expenses for companies and higher prices for everyday items for consumers. The stock market, a barometer of economic confidence, reacted with volatility. Investors were uncertain about the long-term effects of these tariffs on the global economy. The world braced itself for a trade war, the likes of which had not been seen in decades. Memories of past trade conflicts resurfaced, adding to the tension. The Trump administration, however, remained defiant. They believed that the United States had the resilience and strength to endure the challenges ahead. The president dismissed concerns about a trade war, arguing that the United States was strong enough to weather any storm. He maintained that the tariffs were a necessary step to protect national interests. He insisted that the tariffs were necessary to protect American workers and industries. The goal was to revive domestic manufacturing and reduce dependency on foreign goods. The world held its breath, uncertain of what the future held. The unfolding events would shape the global economic landscape for years to come, with far-reaching consequences. One of the earliest and most controversial targets of President Trump's tariffs was the steel and aluminum industry. These metals, essential for construction, manufacturing, and national defense, became the tip of the spear in the administration's trade offensive. On March 12, 2025, the Trump administration imposed a 25% tariff on all imported steel and aluminum, regardless of their origin. The administration justified these tariffs on the grounds of national security. They argued that a robust domestic steel and aluminum industry was vital for America's defense industrial base. Relying on foreign suppliers, they claimed, posed an unacceptable risk. The tariffs, they insisted, were necessary to ensure that the United States could produce these critical materials in times of need. However, critics were quick to point out that the United States already had significant domestic production capacity for steel and aluminum. They argued that the national security justification was a smokescreen for protectionism. Moreover, they warned that the tariffs would harm American businesses and consumers by raising the cost of these essential materials. The steel and aluminum tariffs were just the beginning. They were a harbinger of a much broader and more aggressive trade policy that would soon engulf a wide range of goods and countries. The Trump administration, emboldened by its early moves, seemed determined to upend the global trading order. The trade war with China, which had been simmering for years, reached a boiling point in April 2025. This escalation marked a significant turning point in international relations, as tensions that had been building for over a decade finally erupted into a full-blown economic conflict. The Trump administration, accusing China of intellectual property theft and unfair trade practices, imposed a series of escalating tariffs on Chinese goods. These measures were intended to pressure China into changing its trade policies and to protect American industries from what was perceived as unfair competition. These tariffs, starting at 20% and eventually reaching as high as 54%, targeted a vast array of products, from electronics and machinery to clothing and footwear. The impact was felt across multiple sectors, affecting both consumers and businesses. China, refusing to back down, responded with retaliatory tariffs of its own. The Chinese government aimed to demonstrate its resilience and unwillingness to be coerced by foreign powers. Chinese officials accused the United States of protectionism and bullying. They argued that the American actions were a direct attack on China's economic sovereignty and a blatant attempt to stifle its growth. They warned that the trade war would harm both economies and disrupt global supply chains. The interconnected nature of modern trade meant that the repercussions would be felt worldwide, not just in the two countries directly involved. The tit-for-tat tariff battle between the world's two largest economies sent shockwaves through the global trading system. Markets reacted with volatility, and businesses around the world braced for the impact of increased costs and uncertainty. Businesses on both sides of the Pacific felt the pain. Small businesses in particular struggled to cope with the sudden increase in costs and the disruption to their supply chains. American companies that relied on Chinese manufacturing saw their costs soar. Many were forced to either absorb the higher expenses or pass them on to consumers, leading to higher prices for everyday goods. Chinese exporters struggled to find alternative markets for their goods. The loss of the American market, one of their largest, posed a significant challenge to their business models. The trade war, once a distant threat, had become a stark reality, with far-reaching consequences. The economic landscape was being reshaped, and the long-term effects were still uncertain. The conflict went beyond tariffs. It encompassed a broader range of issues, including technology, finance, and geopolitical influence. The United States imposed restrictions on Chinese technology companies, citing national security concerns. These restrictions aimed to limit China's access to critical technologies and to curb its growing influence in the tech sector. China, in turn, sought to reduce its dependence on the American dollar and promote its own currency, the yuan, as an alternative global reserve currency. This move was part of a broader strategy to assert its economic independence and challenge the dominance of the US dollar. The trade war had morphed into a broader geopolitical rivalry, with implications extending far beyond economics. The world watched closely as the two superpowers vied for dominance, knowing that the outcome would shape the future of global trade and international relations. Even America's closest allies were not spared from President Trump's tariff onslaught. The administration's aggressive trade policies sent shockwaves through international markets and diplomatic circles alike. Canada and Mexico, partners in the North American Free Trade Agreement, found themselves in the crosshairs of the administration's trade policy. These nations, which had long enjoyed a symbiotic economic relationship with the United States, were suddenly facing an uncertain future. Despite having renegotiated NAFTA into the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement just a few years earlier, the New Deal was supposed to bring stability and predictability to North American trade. The Trump administration threatened to impose tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, citing concerns about trade deficits and unfair competition. This move was seen as a direct challenge to the economic integration that had been painstakingly built over decades. The tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, particularly steel and aluminum, sparked outrage and disbelief in Ottawa and Mexico City. Citizens and officials alike took to the streets and the airwaves to voice their discontent. Canadian and Mexican officials argued that they were being unfairly targeted, especially after having made concessions to secure the USMCA deal. They felt betrayed and questioned the reliability of their powerful neighbor. They warned that the tariffs would damage the integrated North American economy and undermine decades of trilateral cooperation. The interconnected supply chains and shared industries were at risk of being disrupted. The Trump administration, however, remained unmoved. They were steadfast in their belief that these measures were necessary to protect American interests. They argued that the tariffs were necessary to protect American jobs and industries from unfair competition from Canada and Mexico. The administration's focus was on revitalizing domestic manufacturing and reducing the trade deficit. They insisted that the USMCA, while an improvement over NAFTA, did not go far enough in addressing their concerns. the administration sought further assurances and adjustments to the trade dynamics. The tariffs, they claimed, were simply a negotiating tactic to extract further concessions from America's neighbors. This strategy, however, was fraught with risks and uncertainties. The tariffs on Canada and Mexico strained relations between the three North American allies. The diplomatic tension was palpable, and the future of their economic partnership was in jeopardy. Canada retaliated with tariffs of its own on American goods, while Mexico threatened to do the same. The tit-for-tat measures escalated the trade conflict, making resolution more complex. The dispute cast a shadow over the USMCA, raising doubts about the future of North American trade and cooperation. The long-term impact of these tariffs remained uncertain, but the immediate effect was a chilling of relations and economic instability. Inflation is like an invisible thief, slowly eroding the value of money. You might not notice it at first, but over time the cost of goods and services begins to rise. This can make everyday essentials like groceries and fuel more expensive. And well, it doesn't stop there. Inflation can impact savings, investments, and even wages. Understanding inflation is crucial because it affects everyone, from individuals to businesses, and even entire economies. Economists across the board began to sound the alarm. They warned that the tariffs could lead to higher consumer prices and disrupt global supply chains. Many argued that the long-term economic impact could be far-reaching, affecting not just the targeted industries but the economy as a whole. The political backlash was swift and intense. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle voiced their concerns. They argued that the tariffs could hurt American businesses and consumers. Some even suggested that the policy could lead to a trade war, with unpredictable consequences. Retaliation from other countries was inevitable. Nations affected by the tariffs imposed their own countermeasures, targeting key American exports. This tit-for-tat escalation created a climate of uncertainty, making it difficult for businesses to plan for the future. The global economic landscape became increasingly unstable. The legacy of these tariffs is one of disruption. Industries had to adapt to new realities and many faced significant challenges. While some sectors saw short-term gains, the overall impact on the economy remains a topic of debate. What is clear, though, is that the tariffs left a lasting mark on trade policies and economic relationships worldwide.